Alfred was not born into a peaceful England. He was born into a land that had learned to flinch. For generations, the sea had been a doorway for danger. Viking raids did not only steal silver, they stole certainty. They taught villages to sleep lightly, taught leaders to react late, and taught rival kingdoms how expensive division could be. By the time Alfred of Wessex stepped into the center of events, England was not a single nation. It was a patchwork of kingdoms trying to survive the next storm. That storm grew far beyond seasonal raiding. Scandinavian forces began arriving with the intention to stay. They wintered on English soil, built camps, gathered horses, seeing England not as a hit-and-run target but as land to hold. Northumbria shattered. East Anglia fell. Mercia weakened. The old pattern of defense, raise a militia, chase the raiders, hope they leave, stopped working because the enemy stopped leaving. Alfred became king at the worst possible time. His brother, King Ethelred, died after hard fighting, and the crown passed to Alfred while the pressure kept rising. Alfred was not stepping into glory. He was stepping into crisis, forced to lead when the rules of survival had already changed. In that world, a king was not judged by speeches. He was judged by whether families could sleep through the night and wake to find their fields still standing. In 878, Wessex nearly collapsed. The Viking leader Guthrum pushed deep into Alfred's territory and caught the kingdom off balance. Alfred was driven into hiding in the marshlands of Athelney, a place of wet ground, narrow paths, and constant risk. It is often told like legend, but the reality is sharper. England's strongest remaining kingdom was one defeat away from disappearing. Alfred's court scattered, his supporters were hunted, and the sense of safety that Wessex had built began to break. Alfred did not win by luck. He rebuilt by turning survival into structure. From hiding, he gathered loyal men, restored communication, and chose his moment carefully. When he emerged, he rallied forces at Egbert's Stone and marched to Edington. There, he fought Guthrum and won a victory that mattered because it proved something priceless. The Vikings could be stopped if England changed how it defended itself. After Edington, Alfred did something that seems surprising in a story of invasion. He negotiated. The agreement that followed, often linked to the Treaty of Wedmore, allowed Guthrum to withdraw under terms, including baptism, and it set practical boundaries that later hardened into what people call the Danelaw. This was not softness. It was time purchased at a controlled price. Alfred understood that Wessex needed breathing room to rebuild foundations before the next wave hit. Here is what made Alfred different. He treated war as a problem of systems, not only courage. He looked at the Old English pattern and saw why it failed. The fyrd, the militia, was real, but it was seasonal. Men had farms. Harvest did not pause for politics. When raids came, the fyrd assembled slowly and disbanded too soon. Vikings exploited that rhythm. Strike quickly, retreat faster, or wait until the defenders went home. Alfred understood that if the enemy arrives by water and attacks by surprise, defense must already exist before the sails appear. So he built a new map of safety. Alfred's greatest innovation was the Bure system, fortified towns and strongpoints placed across Wessex in a deliberate network. A burh was not only a wall, it was a plan. Burhs were spaced so ordinary people could reach one within a reasonable distance, and so defenders could move between them without leaving large gaps. Each burh had garrison obligations tied to landholding. If you held land, you owed defense. Duty was built into ownership, which meant protection stopped being a favor and became an expected duty that every landholder understood. With burhs, raids became harder. A raiding party that met walls could not loot quickly. A party that lingered risked being trapped between garrisons. Protected markets meant trade could continue. Stored supplies meant communities could survive disruption. Alfred was turning panic into procedure, and procedure into endurance. Over time, burhs also became places where craftsmen, merchants, and officials clustered, slowly rebuilding town life that had weakened after Rome. The brilliance was not any single fortress. It was the network. A messenger could ride from one burh to another, warning ahead. Neighbors could shelter behind walls while the militia gathered. Instead of chasing raiders after the damage was done, Alfred wanted to deny raiders the easy first hour that made raids profitable. When profit drops, raids become risk. He also reformed service. Instead of calling everyone at once and then sending everyone home, Alfred moved toward rotation. Part of the fighting force could be on duty while the rest farmed, then they would switch. It was not perfect, but it made defense more reliable and reduced the enemy's advantage of timing. The message to the Vikings was simple. Wessex would not be undefended just because the crops needed harvesting. Then Alfred began to challenge the Vikings on the element they controlled best: the sea. England had feared the sea because the sea brought raiders. Alfred began to see the sea as something to contest. He commissioned ships that were larger and sturdier than typical longships, designed to fight rather than only travel. Early naval efforts were uneven, sometimes successful, sometimes clumsy, but the idea was revolutionary for an island under pressure. You cannot be safe if you surrender the waters around you. Alfred's strength was not only military, it was intellectual. He understood that kingdoms collapse not only from swords but from forgetting who they are. War burns books. It kills teachers. It replaces memory with fear. Alfred promoted learning, translation, and writing. He encouraged key works to be translated into English so knowledge could spread beyond a small Latin-speaking elite. This was a political act as much as a cultural one. When people can learn in their own language, identity becomes harder to erase. He supported record-keeping that became the Anglo-Saxon chronicle, a living memory of battles, rulers, and lessons learned the hard way. Memory for Alfred was not decoration, it was defense. A society that remembers patterns can plan. A society that writes down obligations can enforce them. A society that records agreements can hold leaders accountable when promises break. He strengthened law as well. His law code gathered earlier traditions and Christian teaching into a framework meant to reduce chaos and revenge cycles. It signaled to ordinary people that the king was not only a war leader. The king was a guardian of order. That shift changes what people expect from leadership, and expectation is a kind of power. It makes obedience less dependent on fear alone and more dependent on stability people can feel in daily life. Alfred also paid attention to the economy because defense requires resources. Fortifications need labor. Garrisons need food. Messengers need routes that function. Burhs became protected places where trade could survive and coin could circulate. Under constant threat, even ordinary markets become strategic. A kingdom that cannot feed itself cannot defend itself. And a kingdom that cannot defend itself cannot remain a kingdom. Under Alfred, Wessex became more than a front line. It became a workshop for survival. And this is where the long story connects to empire, even though empire was centuries away. Alfred showed that power is the ability to organize life so a society can endure, to build systems that outlast emergencies, to use information as leverage, to turn geography from weakness into advantage. Alfred did not unite all English lands in his lifetime, but he made unity possible by preventing total collapse. He created a center strong enough to resist, negotiate, and recover. After him, successors could push back, absorb territory, and slowly pull fractured regions into something more coherent. In other words, Alfred bought the future time to arrive, yet Alfred's era also left a reality that shaped the next chapter: compromise. The Danelaw did not vanish because Alfred wanted it gone. Scandinavian settlement had become real. Laws, language, and customs had taken root. Peace meant managing boundaries and coexistence at the same time. Trade in some places, tension in others, violence when agreements broke. The island was learning that power is not only victory, it is management. That is the true legacy of Alfred's reign. He did not defeat the sea. He learned to prepare for it. He did not end the crisis forever. He built the structures that made future survival possible. Walls, rotation, records, law, and contested coasts. These were the quiet tools that turned fear into strategy. Alfred's reforms also changed what people believed a king was for. Before, many rulers were judged mainly as war leaders. Under Alfred, the crown began to look like an institution, something that could coordinate defense, standardize obligations, preserve knowledge, and make long plans. That mental shift matters because institutions can outlive a person. A heroic fighter can die and the kingdom can collapse. A system can be inherited. When Alfred died in 899, the Viking threat had not vanished, and the Danelaw still existed as a hard reality on the map. But Wessex now had fortified towns, clearer obligations, better response time, and a stronger sense of shared purpose. Those tools would be used by his successors, especially his son Edward and his daughter Athelflaed in Mercia, to push back, reclaim territory, and tighten the idea of a single English kingdom. And once a kingdom learns to survive through systems, it begins to imagine something bigger than survival. Next comes the tension Alfred could not erase: the Danelaw. England divided again, and the long struggle to reunite it.